Tell me if this sounds familiar. You sit down at your desk, ready to finally start that project, study for that exam, or just get your life together. You look at the clock, and it says 2:03 p.m., and immediately a silent alarm goes off in your head. You simply cannot start at 2:03. That is a chaotic, asymmetrical, completely unacceptable time to begin anything of value. So, you make a very logical, unspoken agreement with yourself. I will start exactly at 2:30. But here is the fascinating part. Those 27 minutes in between, they aren't relaxing. You aren't resting. You are sitting in a bizarre psychological waiting room. You might be scrolling on your phone or staring at the wall, but you are hyper aware of the ticking clock, just burning time until the digital numbers align perfectly. And heaven forbid you get distracted, look down and it's 2:32 p.m. Because if that happens, the internal contract is broken, the moment is ruined, and you now have absolutely no choice but to wait until 3 p.m. If this is you, you are about to feel very seen. Because for years, society has slapped a very ugly label on this exact behavior. People call it procrastination, they call it laziness, poor time management, or just making excuses to avoid doing the hard work. They tell you to just start, as if you were a machine with a simple on and off switch. But they are completely missing the reality of how your neurological hardware actually operates. You aren't lazy, and you aren't looking for an excuse to avoid the task. What your brain is actually doing in those moments is desperately searching for a temporal landmark. In behavioral psychology, this is known as the clean slate effect. Your brain doesn't view time as a continuous flowing river. It categorizes time into mental chapters. When you transition from a state of rest or distraction into a state of deep focus, your brain requires a massive amount of cognitive energy to execute what neurologists call task switching. To make that transition successful, your brain craves a psychological boundary, a clear, undeniable border that separates the old you who is scrolling on the internet from the new you who is about to conquer the world. Uneven, random numbers like 2:03 or 2:13 feel like cognitive clutter. They carry the messy residue of the previous hour, but 2:30 or the top of the hour at 3 o'clock, those are perfect right angles. They signal a flawless, uncontaminated, fresh start to your nervous system. You aren't waiting for the clock to change, you are waiting for your mental environment to be entirely sterilized before you step inside. This isn't a glitch in your productivity, it is a highly sophisticated coping mechanism designed to give you the exact psychological momentum you need to begin.
To understand why your brain physically rejects the idea of starting a task at 3:14 p.m., we have to look at the incredibly complex machinery of your prefrontal cortex, the CEO of your brain. This is the area responsible for executive functioning, planning, and focus. Evolutionarily speaking, your brain is a ruthless energy conservation machine. For thousands of years, survival depended on not wasting calories. Today, one of the most energetically expensive things you can ask your brain to do is something called task switching. Moving from a state of low-friction, passive consumption, like watching a video or staring at the ceiling, into a state of high-friction, active cognitive output requires a massive spike of mental effort. Your brain naturally resists this transition because it feels like a threat to its carefully managed energy reserves. So, to force itself to make the jump, the brain uses a brilliant psychological hack, the creation of boundaries. Researchers refer to these boundaries as temporal landmarks. Think about how humans celebrate New Year's Eve. Does the universe physically change between 11:59 p.m. on December 31st and 12 a.m. on January 1st? Of course not. But psychologically, that 1 minute represents a colossal shift. It allows us to put all of our past failures, laziness, and uncompleted tasks into a closed box labeled last year and construct a pristine, untouched identity for this year. When you wait for the clock to strike exactly 4 p.m., you are performing a micro version of New Year's Eve on a daily basis. If you try to start working at 3:14, there is no boundary. The previous version of you, the distracted, tired, or unmotivated version, bleeds into the current moment. The mental workspace feels contaminated. But 4 p.m. is a temporal landmark. It creates a psychological firewall between your past self and your future self.
At 4 p.m., the slate is wiped entirely clean. Your nervous system registers this perfect round number as a safe, sterile environment where a new, highly productive version of you can safely emerge without carrying the heavy baggage of the previous hour. But there is another fascinating layer to this, rooted in the psychology of identity and order. It comes down to a cognitive framework known as the locus of control. When you are putting off a difficult task, it is rarely because you are incapable. It is usually because the task itself feels overwhelming, unpredictable, or chaotic. You cannot control whether the essay you are about to write will be good. You cannot control how stressful the emails in your inbox will be. The outcome is entirely uncertain, which spikes your baseline anxiety. So, what does your brain do when it is faced with an unpredictable threat? It hyperfixates on the one thing it can absolutely control, the exact minute the engagement begins. By refusing to start until the clock shows a perfect, symmetrical time, you are artificially installing a sense of absolute order over a chaotic situation. Demanding that the clock says 4:30 is not a symptom of poor discipline. It is a brilliant subconscious negotiation. You are telling the task, I will face you, but only on my terms and only when the stage is perfectly set.
Waiting for the perfect time is a magnificent architectural feat of the brain. It builds a beautiful, sterile room where you feel entirely in control before you begin something difficult. It is a psychological refuge, a safe harbor from the overwhelming demands of your day. But there is a very fine, dangerous line where this refuge slowly turns into a cage. If you deal with perfectionism, high-functioning anxiety, or if the fear of failure is constantly humming in the background of your mind, the clean slate effect stops being a tool to help you start. Instead, it transforms into an invisible prison that keeps you completely paralyzed. Think about the true psychological toll of missing the mark. You tell yourself you will start studying, writing, or working at exactly 2 p.m. You have the mental momentum ready, but you get distracted by a single text message. You look down, and the digital clock suddenly reads 2:02 p.m. The pristine environment is instantly shattered. The temporal landmark is ruined, and your immediate internal response is not a logical, "Oh well, I'm 2 minutes late, I will just begin now." The response is a visceral, full-body rejection. The internal contract is broken, so you push the start time to 2:30 p.m. But here's the real tragedy of this brilliant superpower. What exactly happens in those 28 minutes of waiting? You don't go for a walk, you don't take a nap or genuinely recharge your nervous system. You enter a state of agonizing cognitive purgatory. You're physically sitting at your desk, but mentally you are trapped in a bleak waiting room. You might scroll through social media or stare blankly at a screen, but you're not actually enjoying the downtime. You're infected with a heavy dose of rest guilt. You are actively punishing yourself for not working, while simultaneously refusing to work because the numbers on the clock are asymmetrical and the moment feels dirty. The very mechanism you built to protect your energy and create order is now generating its own distinct, isolating exhaustion. This is the ultimate paradox of the perfect start. You are so desperate to perform flawlessly and so terrified of stepping into a chaotic workflow that you end up stealing hours of your own life sitting in the bleachers, waiting for a whistle that never blows. The modern world does not operate on perfect hour marks. Life is inherently messy. Important emails arrive at 3:17 p.m., and sudden crises happen at 4:43 p.m. When you train your nervous system to only function within the sterile borders of round numbers, you inadvertently make yourself fragile to the chaotic rhythm of reality. You have to ask yourself a difficult question. Are you waiting for the clock to hit 3 p.m. because it truly gives you the momentum to succeed, or are you waiting because the thought of starting right now in the imperfect present feels too heavy to carry? Because one is preparation, and the other is a hostage situation.
So what does all of this actually mean? If you constantly find yourself paralyzed at 2:13 p.m., waiting for the digital clock to hit exactly 2:30 p.m. before you finally open that blank document or start cleaning your apartment, you are not struggling with a lack of discipline. You are not a lazy procrastinator who is simply making endless excuses to avoid hard work. Society wants to label you as someone with poor time management skills, but the reality is far more fascinating.
You are simply navigating a brain that requires absolute structural order before it transitions into a state of deep focus. Your nervous system is meticulously designed to seek out temporal landmarks. It uses the clean slate effect to manage overwhelming cognitive energy and reduce the anxiety of stepping into a chaotic workflow. You are artificially creating a predictable, sterile environment so your prefrontal cortex feels safe enough to perform. You aren't broken. You aren't fundamentally flawed or looking for an easy way out. You are just demanding a perfectly clean, symmetrical runway before you allow yourself to take off. But I want to know your physical proof. What is the exact name of the task, the specific assignment, or the household chore that you are currently putting off until the clock hits the next perfect hour? Confess it down in the comments right now so the rest of us can feel a little less alone in this waiting room. If this breakdown hit home for you and completely shifted the way you understand your own habits, hit the subscribe button. And if you want to understand the other unspoken truths about how your mind works, the next video is going to hit you even harder. Tap the screen to keep decoding your behavior, and I will see you there.